Okay, we got the slides working. It was a brutal moment for a second. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Reinforce. Welcome to our session, AWS Event Engineering at Scale. I'm Gabrielle Genovich. I'm our Technical Operations Manager for Event Technology here at AWS. And I'm joined today by Brian Searcy, who's our Senior Technical Program Manager, as well as Steve Seymour, our Networking Tech Leader. Our session today is a little bit of a look behind the scenes at what it takes to deliver an event like Reinforce or like reInvent, if you've been there, from both a technical, security, and network perspective. First, I want to give you the who, what, why, where, when of our team in the whole event process. So who are we? What do we do? The event technology team delivers an event network experience. What is this? We provide secure, dependable, temporary networks that support our customers, partners, vendors, and service teams. We consult, we innovate in partnership with all of our stakeholders for teams who want to do demos, create, use, like if you went to the Builders Fair here, or utilize our network in any sort of creative or unique ways during the event. We push technical boundaries without compromising customer security or creating scenarios with technical risk. We drive continuous improvement. We're always looking for feedback mechanisms to act as the voice of our customers to ensure this is a good experience throughout the network. We ensure redundancy, fault tolerance, and we actively seek out and try to remedy single points of failure. We also handle the peculiar. At Amazon and AWS, peculiar is part of our culture, and we try to bring that into all of our events. So we'll do a little bit of a talk later about some of the quirky and fun things that we get to support from a technology and network standpoint. Let's talk, what are the numbers? AWS, very data-driven. We are no different. We love metrics. This slide is showing us the year-over-year growth in attendee count for reInvent. So 2015, 20,000, 2019, unknown. But all of these are the metrics that we look at on a network standpoint to ensure we're having a good customer experience. We're looking at what kind of bandwidth usage there is, what's our total traffic, and we're also looking at network devices. So we're going to talk about operational support for this event and what it takes. And that includes things like switches, routers, access points, all of the hardware in the infrastructure that actually brings the network to you. Who makes it happen? When I first joined this team about 1.5 years ago, I was clueless at how many partners and stakeholders and people it takes to pull off events of this size. It's kind of enormous. This is just a small list. So in AWS, I'm part of AWS Marketing, the event technology team. We also have an entire event operations team that does everything from the catering that you guys have for meals, all the way to ordering the headsets you're wearing. Like, it's a full operation. We also partner with AWS Security. Reinforce is obviously a security-focused conference, but security is there the entire way with us, making sure we're safe, secure, we're handling data correctly. Like, we talk to them every week on everything that we're doing. Obviously, I hope, AWS networking. We're going to talk about the network today, and we also partner with the service teams. We'll talk a little bit more about the circuits and services that we use to deliver our event networks. And then all of our support functions. We have solutions architects, premium support, enterprise support that does account support. They also support our events here. So the people you're seeing leading other sessions, service teams, they're also helping us with our network, our new technology, innovation, things like that. And then a lot of very close vendor-partner relationships. So for Reinforce and reInvent, our managed network provider is Shownets. We talk to them every week. I'm on the phone with them. We work really closely with them in all of the design, deployment of the network. And they're here on site. They've set up everything. So if you've connected to the attendee Wi-Fi, which I recommend you do, that's also being delivered by them. Our circuit providers. So we partner with different circuit providers to help with our events. CenturyLink and Verizon are two that we use, and then also our venues. So one thing that I was not aware of when I joined is how closely we work with venues. So here in Boston, we're at the BCEC. In Las Vegas, we have multiple properties that we partner with. Next year, Reinforce will be in Houston, so we'll be partnering with them. And there's a lot of things that we consider when we're looking at the actual venue for network. We're looking at, can we use the local infrastructure. We'll go on site visits months before in the planning process, and we'll walked around this room, probably back in January, and looked at what was actually physically here, how we can utilize that, where we might need to add things to give increased coverage. And we work with ShowNets and we work with the venue to build out these type of floor plans to ensure that we have coverage in all areas that attendees are at. It's also, we'll have some like fun, quirky moments, but we're also looking at things like roofs and parking lots and like where columns are that we can put these types of things on, as well as things like in-house fiber runs, hardline Ethernet drops, and infrastructure like that as well. Who do we support? Number one, we support you. You're our attendees at Amazon and AWS. It's all about working backwards from the customer, and that's what we do when we design. So event attendees and sponsors are our number one customer, but we also have a lot of internal customers within the event. So the event managers that I mentioned, we're gathering requirements from them. We're ensuring they have a great experience here. They need to use the network. They're out working at the registration tables. They're doing all of this work, and we need a reliable network for them as well. Our AWS product teams and service teams, we need to support launches and demos and breakout sessions where they're teaching you guys about all of the new things that we offer, and you need a reliable, independent network for all of that to come off. We also do AV streaming within the event, live streaming. We live streamed the Keynote yesterday, so if any of you weren't in person and live streamed, that's something that we support and needed the network for that. The AWS Events mobile app, which you should download if you haven't yet, that's part of our team. And then we also partner with physical security for cameras and scanners. What do we support? So part of working backwards from the customer is knowing that you don't show up here with your phone only. I personally have a computer, two computers, a tablet, a phone, and a smartwatch that all need to connect in some way. And we know that that's how attendees travel. That's how they come to these conferences. And we need to make sure that our network can support not only the number of people on site, but also the number of devices on site. So this is a very big thing that we look at when we're designing different areas and spaces. We know that you might be in like a lab or a session and you're like taking pictures on your phone here, but you're also typing something there for notes, and we want to make sure that all of your devices can connect in a reliable way. What else? The quirky extras. So part of the really fun part of this job is we get to be involved in all of the cool, quirky type of things that we do at events. This includes special hardware and giveaways. So a few years ago when Deep Lens came out at reInvent, they gave those away. We were involved in that launch. AWS Deep Racer, if you haven't seen, is the car that uses AWS, and we support that. We've supported it at reInvent last year, all throughout 2019 as it makes its way around doing its tournament. We've supported that. A few years ago, when the AWS IoT button launched, we supported that, so everyone at reInvent got an AWS IoT button. Brian's going to get into a little bit of wireless theory and why an IoT button device, when you open it up, can cause problems in an event atmosphere. So that was something that we were concerned about and needed to plan and work with early on. We also do sort of like unique events. So if you've come to one of our events and gone to a hackathon, sometimes they're in strange spaces. They might be outdoors. They might be in different rooms. We support that type of thing. Here we have Capture the Flag, if you've gone over in the Security Learning Hub and seen that. So we've worked with that team to ensure that that's a good experience. At reInvent last year, at Replay, which is the party at the end of the week, we also offered wireless connectivity for rideshare for the first time. So one of the things when looking at our customer requirements was, this is outside, this is off the campus, but what if someone has bad connectivity? Like we know outdoors in Las Vegas, this is an environmental concern. There's a lot of buildings and people have bad coverage. So we wanted to ensure that everyone could get a ride home safely if they needed to, so we added wireless there. We've also done some things at reInvent, like adding airport registration. So if you join us this year for reInvent and you go to the airport and you get off and you want to register right there, you can. You don't need to go into one of the other venues. Part of the challenge with that is we had no internet connections at McCarran Airport. So we sourced different hardware, different options, looking how do we provide coverage so that you have a seamless registration process. So these are some of the kind of things that I don't think you initially think about at events that we get to work on. How do you plan for scale? The name of the title, Event Engineering at Scale. So we're going to dive into this more. Events 30, 40 people, not too hard to plan for. Here we have thousands of people. reInvent, we have thousands more all across different venues. So these are our challenges, and there's some very specific design requirements and choices that we make to ensure that we can meet these kind of requirements. If you look at this hall, there's hundreds of people in here. It's a very different experience and environment to make sure you all have connectivity than if it was 10 people in an office building. And so these are the types of things that we're working at when we think about scale. Our first step is really design. I've kind of mentioned it, but we design all of these different areas. So we take floor plans, blueprints, we look at what rooms are sessions, what rooms are hands-on labs where you can go and try out different services either through a tutorial or on your own. And we see what's in the room in the space and then what kind of connectivity needs they have. This design planning process starts almost a year ahead of time. We're planning as soon as this event ends, we're going to start planning for next year. And that's just our cycle. Like, there's no downtime. Well, there's like a couple days, but I'm not going to work on Friday. But everything else is like right back at it for the next year. So it's a long time process for this. So we're looking at requirement gathering. We're doing reviews. Like, if you go and a sponsor's in there and they're doing a demo in the Learning Hub, and we've met with them, we've talked to them. We're like, what are you doing? Are you streaming video? Do you need something different? And we partner with everyone to ensure like we understand their needs and can accommodate those. And we're looking at the overall network design. So when we looked at the numbers before, it was total bandwidth. We're looking at forecasting. What do we expect? A few years ago, not everyone was bringing as many devices. They're not doing as much streaming. So things change, and we can't just stay static. We need to sort of forecast and think about what's next for network usage. And then space planning and environmental review. Every event, every venue, every city we go to, it's different. There's not a one-size-fits-all for an event network. I kind of wish there was, but I'm also very happy there isn't, because this is what makes our job so fun. And then we have operational support. So I mentioned our vendors, our vendor partners, Shownets, who brings in all of our network. These 3 pictures here are actually from reInvent a few years ago, and this is the hardware and the equipment that I've been mentioning. They actually pack it up in crates. We ship it to Las Vegas. They stage it. They have to break it all out, set it all up in a week. So if you look at the schedule, this is like a calendar clip, but you can kind of tell like that whole first line, that's 1 week, that's all set up. We show up before Thanksgiving and we work all the way through until the Sunday before reInvent in order to get the network up and running. The event, 5 days. For reInvent, 2 days here. And then we tear it all out. So it really is a temporary network. Maybe a day, day and a half, and everything is gone, packed up, shipped back out. So there's huge like logistical planning and like operational planning that goes into each of these events. We also do on-site operational support. So here at Inforce, we have on-site support for the mobile app with our partners. We have on-site support for network. We have a whole like response plan if something does happen. Like, we have people on-site responding. So all of that has to be coordinated and worked through so that you never know if we have anything happening. Like, it should be seamless for you as an attendee. We also do communication, escalation plans internally, build contingency plans, like if something was going to happen with the weather or things like that, like we have a backup plan for everything. And then the schedule. So I mentioned the timeline. We start planning almost a year ahead of time. We have to plan load in, load out, what remains in place, what's leaving, where it's going to the next place. Like, that takes a huge amount of operational lift as well. So talking about scale, I wanted to kind of give you guys this image. This is the reInvent campus map from 2016 and the one for this year at 2019. So I think this is a great image to show you, just in the reInvent space, how much we've grown. 20,000 attendees, I think we pulled up at the beginning of the slide, up to 50,000 last year, and we're continually adding new things. So in 2018, we also had like the festival grounds, which is where the replay party is. It isn't showing on this map, but we're constantly adding new things, which then we have to plan for with requirements. Steve's going to talk to you a little bit about how we build the network between a multi-venue campus, but there's a lot of concerns with venue and how we provide the same network at all of these venues. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Brian. He's going to dive into some of the wireless theory that we cover, and then we'll kind of dive more into why and how we make things work for you guys at scale.
Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. As Gabrielle said, I'm going to give you a quick overview of how we handle the networking inside of all the buildings that we cover for our events and our campuses. I'll turn it over to Steve to describe how we connect in between buildings and to the wider internet. We'll make this real quick. I know it's after lunch, and we're not going to do too much deep on this, but you can come talk to us later. We have a booth in the SLC when we're done, and you can ask us some more questions if you want to go a little deeper. First thing to understand about wireless, it's very different from your typical hardwired communications. Most of the lines you guys work with, copper, fiber, whatever it is, it's full duplex communication. So you guys can send and receive data at the same time. Wireless network, completely different story. Single duplex. So you can either send data between your station and the access point, or from the access point, the AP back to you. That's the only thing that can happen on the medium at one time. If you're not familiar with this, think back to when you were a kid. You used a walkie-talkie. You and your friend are talking at the same time. You completely step on each other. No communication goes through. You've got to stop, resend that communication. Wireless networks behave in the exact same way. Second thing you need to know about wireless is there's two bands that we use currently in the 802.11 wireless spectrums. We've got your 2.4 band and your 5 gigahertz band. A couple important differences. 2.4, while it does have greater range, its signals travel further. They go through obstacles better, walls, people, doors, things like that. This sounds like an advantage, but we'll get to why this actually isn't later in the presentation. The bad thing about 2.4, it does have slightly lower data rates, although that's not the bigger concern. Most important thing right at the top, there's only 3 non-overlapping channels in this spectrum, so very limited capability before you have to go reuse a channel in a space. If you look at the 5 gigahertz spectrum, the biggest difference, right now we have currently 25 channels we can use in 5 gigahertz. Yeah, it doesn't have quite as much range, doesn't have quite as much penetration through obstacles, does have higher data rates, higher maximum speeds at which you can connect and send data over the network. We're going to look a little bit closer at both these spectrums and the other aspects of them. So here you have your 2.4 spectrum. As I said, there's 14 channels available, but unfortunately they overlap. So 1, 6, and 11 are your only 3 non-overlapping channels. You're limited to using just those 3 channels, essentially. A couple things you have to worry about in terms of interference in this spectrum. Bluetooth is your big one. We all have Bluetooth headphones these days. We all have Bluetooth to our watches, Bluetooth to everything else. Bluetooth operates in this same spectrum. You can't control what channel it's on. It could be anywhere in here. That's creating interference, that's creating noise, that's slowing down the data that you're trying to send, whether it's on a cellular network or anything else. The other thing you run into very frequently, especially if you've happened to look at your network list on your phone today, you'll see everybody's mobile hotspot. Everybody today walks around with a 2.4 access point in their pocket. Most of you probably don't realize how often you have it on, and every time those are out there, those are interfering with connectivity in the 2.4 spectrum as well. A couple things that you run into, not quite as often in the event environment, but you have to watch out for sources of constant interference. So that's your microwave ovens, baby monitors, things like that at home, anything that's sending a continuous video signal. So instead of having intermittent interference or occasional throughout, this will block up actually whole chunks of the 2.4 spectrum and render it unusable. So lots of kind of trip mines to watch out for if you're deploying a 2.4 network at an event. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got 5 gigahertz. So today we have 25 usable channels in this space. You can see them listed across the top. It was not always this case. The 5 gig spectrum used to be broken up and assigned for many other uses. The biggest one, where you see the red in the middle here, this spectrum used to be carved out for weather radar. As there's been more demand over the years for increased usage on these wireless networks, the FCC and other regulatory agencies have found a way to say, all right, we're going to give you guys some more spectrum. We'll give you the ability to use this that we used to block out. But unfortunately, we have to find a way to make sure that your communications aren't interfering with radar. The way this works is there's a mechanism called dynamic frequency selection. So anybody who's using any devices that are transmitting on this spectrum, this entire middle band in the gray and the red, basically your access point is going to look out and sense for radio interference all the time. If it senses radar, it's instantly going to stop broadcasting. It's going to look for another channel. If you happen to be connected to it at the time, it's going to dump your traffic off the network. You're going to have to find a new access point. It's quite an interruption. So we got to design around it. You have to understand where it's coming from. The good news is most of the time indoors you don't deal with this. We'll get to a couple use cases later that you do have to keep in mind, especially outdoors in your airports. But the main thing to understand here is that we have far more capacity, we have far more channels, and except for the DFS in the middle, you do have spectrum ranges at the beginning and at the end that aren't a problem, and then you don't have to worry about DFS. So where does this lead us? For event networks, 2.4 bad, 5 gig good, right? We want the higher capacity, we want the higher data rates, we want to be able to control the interference in the environment. We don't want to deal with 2.4 outside of your one-offs like your IoT demos or older devices that don't support it. If you've ever come to an event and done a demo, or if you ever worked in a booth and done a demo, the first question you're going to hear, do you need any 2.4? Because it probably just isn't going to work with all the saturation from Bluetooth and hotspots and everything else. So we design pretty exclusively for the 5 gigahertz networks these days. All right, there's a couple other considerations. There's a lot of numbers. I'm going to go fast. The important part to remember here is that there's a few tweaks that we make in the event space that you don't want to do on your home network. So don't take this home and take this as advice. The first thing we worry about is when you're broadcasting an SSID, that's just a fancy name to say the network name. So here it's the attendee network. These broadcast with beacons. This is how you advertise, this is how you join the network. Those broadcasts are always done at the lowest available data rate. Typically, your low data rates happen when you're on the edges of your coverage, when you have lower signal strength, which we'll get into in a minute. But as you can see here, if you start adding up SSIDs very quickly, you start adding up different access points, broadcasting them, all of a sudden your overhead just from announcing all of your networks is taking up a huge or all of your available capacity on a channel. So the way we avoid this is by using a much higher, lower data rate. We actually disable, from 1 megabit all the way up to 18 megabits, we disable all those low data rates. Now we can have a lot less overhead. Those broadcast messages travel much faster and much more efficiently in the spectrum that we have. We still want to constrain the number of SSIDs. We typically have no more than 3 or 4 in any given area of the event. And obviously we want to reduce the number of APs that are on the same channel. Another thing to look at here, we talked about data rates. So on your home network, you're typically concerned more about your coverage and your range, and you want to be on your back porch, or you want to have everybody in the house connected. You're not going to go disabling those low data rates. But actually here in the event space we do. We can worry about deploying lots of access points. We can worry about keeping coverages very tight. So we designed for this space here. We want to keep everybody at the show on a -67 or greater signal strength. This corresponds to your higher data rates, at least triple digits. And if you look compared to the lower stuff at the top, if you're on the extended ranges or on very low power levels, you're looking at 5 or 10 or 20 times the performance. If we can keep everybody in the event space at these higher half of the data rates, then we can ensure that everybody's using the spectrum efficiently, everybody's got a good experience. All right, the other thing we have to consider, we talked about deploying lots of access points. We talked about data rates. So the faster your data rate, the faster the data rate you want, the higher your signal strength. Well, we also want to make sure that we have lots of access points in the space. Typically, if you start turning up power levels on access points, your coverage ranges and your cell sizes are getting much larger. Now, all of a sudden, we have more people in the same channel on the same access point, and their communications and their transmissions are going to start interfering. Again, we talked about with the walkie-talkie example, single duplex. Only one person can send or receive data at any given time in any of these wireless cells. But we do want to keep these data rates high. We want to get you guys the highest signal strengths possible. So how do you turn up the power, but not increase the area of these cells and the number of people that are in any given AP? Well, the trick is that we deploy almost exclusively directional access points in all areas of our events. There's a number of different kinds and different flavors, and we pretty much design every room one-off with how we use these, where the access points are, what types, what size the cell patterns are. But if you look up overhead, there's flown throughout this room, you'll see there's rigs with access points on them. These all have directional antennas. So just like the spotlight shown here, we're confining that energy, that radio frequency energy, to a small cell. We're able to turn the power up very high. We're able to get you guys those high data rates, but we're not spreading the light out in all directions like you would with a standard incandescent light bulb. And when you take this to extremes, this is what it looks like. So this is an actual example of the re:Invent Keynote from the last couple of years. If you imagine that every single one of these green dots is a spotlight overhead, you're lighting just a very small section of the room, but you're lighting it very brightly, very powerfully. It's the exact same thing with wireless. In this case, we use over 150 of these to provide connectivity for 10,000 or so attendees, everybody using the Keynote. So this is what gives you the ability to check your email, to send pictures, to hopefully tweet nice things about what's going on in the sessions. And this is really the largest scale deployment that we've done up until this point. Every other aspect of the show, every other area is designed in a very similar manner. There's a couple places, though, this doesn't work. We touched on this briefly earlier, that there's that big chunk in the middle of the 5 gigahertz spectrum where you have to worry about DFS and radar interference. We learned a pretty hard lesson about this a couple of years ago. Knowing that we only had, you take out 16 of the available channels that you have in 5 gig, you've got 9 left. We can do some calculations. We can figure out we can support attendees outdoors in essentially airplane hangars that we built in the desert to support some things in Las Vegas around replay and around hackathons. To those of you who've been there, McCarran Airport, very close by, lots of radar there, so obviously the whole DFS spectrum is out of the question. The other thing you have to worry about is interference from neighboring access points and neighboring networks. And in a dry area like Las Vegas, there's no moisture in the air, signals travel very far. It turns out the interference outdoors on even your 9 remaining channels is pretty substantial. So don't try to do high density wireless outdoors, move it back inside where it belongs. So we're going to talk briefly about security. So everything you do at our events runs on the event network. From the time you guys walked in the building, you registered, hopefully you went down to our security learning center, you saw some exhibitors, you got your badge scanned, you've come to sessions, you've been using the Wi-Fi, we're using the Wi-Fi up here, we've got the live stream, we've got every aspect of the event that relies on the network. So how do we secure this? How do we monitor it? How do we keep track of performance impacting events, security impacting events? Well, we do a lot of things behind the scenes, and as Gabriel alluded to, there's a lot of operational load on this. The first thing we do on the wireless side is we run an Air Magnet Enterprise wireless intrusion detection system. This is a system that monitors the air. We can set it up to alarm for performance impacts, for security impacts. We pass these alerts on to our team, and they operationalize it and actually go out and find anything that's a security risk or a performance risk on the network. We do this also for all of the wired devices on the network, whether that's a switch in your room, an access point, and a breakout. You would not be surprised how often people unplug things on the network to plug in their phone, charge their laptop. It's very common. We want to alert on that. We want to go find them. We want to go fix it. We work very closely with our security team. We do penetration testing and security reviews both before the event, on site. They're going on right now. And we work very closely with the Amazon physical security team. They're the ones here doing all the physical security for the event. We have a very good relationship with them. The network team and the security team, they're always the first 2 people on site and the last 2 to leave. There's also a lot that we do on the network security side with layer 2, layer 3 port security features, routing. We separate the areas of the event into very small, different VLANs, very small blast radius in case of an event. We segregate traffic so you can't get access to information that you as an attendee or I as a speaker or someone else doesn't need access to. There's a lot to go in on this. If you're really interested in learning more, we will be at our booth in the Security Learning Hub when this is all over. Please come by. Happy to dive deeper on this in any way. All right, I'll turn it over to Steve, who's going to talk about how we go from the small rooms and what we do inside each building to how we connect the campuses.
Cool. Thanks very much, Brian. Okay, so let's go back and think about the customer. So at Amazon, we have an approach of working backwards from the customer. So as Gabriel talked about, we have many different types of customers at our events. So just a couple of examples here. We've got kind of breakout sessions similar to this. We have the hands-on labs, the workspaces environments that we use there. We have kind of these boot camp type environments. Lots of people bringing their own devices, sitting there with their laptops out, taking part in training exercises. And then we have things like replay, so the party that happens at the end of reInvent. We have connectivity requirements out there for the production teams that are involved in that as well. So you might have kind of got the idea now. There's a couple of key requirements at the edge of our network. We need to provide that wireless connectivity that Brian's given you all the detail about. There's also a lot of hard lines out there as well. And when it comes down to it, these are the 2 primary access methods onto our event network infrastructure. And this is the piece that ShowNet's absolutely managed for us. How do you bring that all together? So this is actually a real picture from the ShowNet's core infrastructure that we have here on site for Inforce. Now you might be looking at that and thinking, that's a lot of fiber, that's quite messy. Well actually, remember the thing about events is this is all temporary. We need to respond quickly, things change during events as well. But this is the kind of infrastructure that gets put in place by the team, and then by tomorrow, this will all be completely gone. So we wheel this kind of infrastructure into the various locations across the venues that we work in. That's how we run and deploy the systems in these environments. So you remember this picture from earlier that Gabriel showed you. This was the campus back in 2016 for reInvent. So we kind of had the 4 main venues there. And the red lines on here, this was the connectivity that we had in place between them. So the first thing you might notice there is that there's always 2 lines between the venues. And our connectivity here was centered on the Sands Expo, the Venetian complex that we have there. And each of these connections, if we go back a few years, these could be quite relatively low bandwidth. These could be just a couple of gig. But now we absolutely standardize on all these connections being at least 10 gigabits per second. So we have 20 gig here going out to each of the venues, and that's back in 2016. Bring that forward a year. This is the 2017 campus. As you might have gathered, we kind of evolve each year. We look at the infrastructure that we have in place, see what we can do differently, what can we improve. And we realized here that we might start building out a ring between all of these different venues, because re:Invent is just going to continue to grow over the years. We still need that diversity, that resilience between the different properties. So again, we have at least 2 connections between the venues, providing that resilient and diverse access. So this was 2017. Move forward again, 2018 last year, we're expanded again. So once again, between all these venues, we now have multiple 10 gig links. These are all being provided via CenturyLink in Vegas. And we use this to run the event network. So all of those events that you saw, those different types of sessions that we have, they're happening in all of these venues. Not shown on the map here, we also obviously have the party that I mentioned. We have to have connectivity out there. So different activities happening out there, the production requirements that I mentioned as well. So yeah, this is going to continue to grow. Now, once we start looking outside the venues, we need to consider 2 different types of connectivity that we provide at our events. The first one is IP transit. So IP transit is the access to the public internet. When you're out there sending your email, perhaps looking at some cat pictures, tweeting, that kind of thing, that's using IP transit generally to get out to the public internet. The other thing that we heavily use is AWS Direct Connect. So some of you may actually already be using this within your own organizations. And Direct Connect is there to provide connectivity back into the AWS infrastructure specifically. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So if we take that infrastructure that I showed you on the map for Las Vegas for 2018, this is actually what it looks like when we bring it back down to kind of a logical network diagram. You can see the ring that we have there, the connectivity between each of the venues. Kind of a few interesting ones, for example, Festival Grounds where the party was, where Replay was. Connectivity from there, nearest one of the other venues was actually Circus Circus. So you can see kind of this is the infrastructure we put into place. We bring that connectivity back through 2 of the CenturyLink points of presence that we have access to. Those 2 points of presence then give us the diverse connectivity out to the internet for IP transit. And then we follow the best practices for Direct Connect and have multiple access connections into our Direct Connect locations. So that gives us access to all of the AWS regions. So what is this Direct Connect thing? I've talked about it a few times now. Well, when it comes down to it, it's a dedicated private path into the AWS infrastructure. We have 2 types of virtual interface on Direct Connect, and we actually use both of them at our events, so public virtual interfaces and private virtual interfaces. From a customer perspective, if you're using Direct Connect, you might know that you actually benefit from kind of a reduced price for data transfer. But one of the key things about Direct Connect is it gives you a consistent network experience. That's what we're looking for at our events, so it absolutely makes sense that we use our own services here. We can share this physical connectivity across multiple services, multiple AWS accounts, and it gives us access to the whole of the AWS global backbone. So we can reach all of our regions with the exception of China, and we can provision this connectivity really quite quickly. For these temporary networks that we're talking about, we don't have a huge amount of build time. And as you might be familiar with, installing circuits in the industry generally can take a lot of time. So working with our partners here, we can get these circuits in place pretty quickly. So how do we actually use it here for Inforce? So over on the right-hand side, we have the venue here at BCEC. We have 2 10 gig Direct Connect circuits leaving this venue, going into 2 different Direct Connect locations. So we're using one of the locations is here in Boston, and we're using another location that's over in New Jersey. So we bring the 10 gig connectivity into each of those locations, and from there onto the Amazon global backbone. That backbone then gives us access to all of the regions, but split across those 2 types of virtual interface that I mentioned, public and private. So why might we need to be using private virtual interface at something like this? Well, obviously, we don't want to wheel a whole load of servers on site to run some of the back-end infrastructure to run these kind of events. So again, as you might expect, we use EC2 for delivering a bunch of services here, running inside a VPC. So we use private virtual interfaces to access those. On the public side, though, you might have also been downloading content from AWS, accessing the console, perhaps using some of our other services, things like S3. Well, that's how we get access to those. We use a public VIF to provide that, provides optimized routing over the backbone into our infrastructure. So this is actually what we have deployed here. Just to kind of show you that for real, this is the Direct Connect console. At the top here, I'm showing you the 2 connections that we have for Reinforce. So the connection via Halsey and via Markley, which is actually just up the street here. 10 gig connection to each of those. And then for Las Vegas, the connectivity out of the Sands Expo that we use for reInvent, these are the 4 connections that we have here. So this is the standard deployment model we have for using Direct Connect at events. And as we scale up going forwards, we'll just add more connectivity in here as we need to. So we can do link aggregation groups, for example, with Direct Connect. We can add more IP transit as needed. And as we're going to show you later on, kind of you can see where the numbers are heading here and the fact that we're already starting to plan for this. So I mentioned the numbers. I'm going to hand back to Gabrielle for that.
I know you guys have been waiting on the edge of your seats for me to fill in the chart that I had earlier. You've learned all of the things, so now I'll go ahead and show you the numbers. This chart is our internet bandwidth usage at reInvent last year. So this is a standard sort of graph that we look at on our team, and this is the entire event of reInvent. So some kind of cool things that I'm going to point out for you. It's a 5-day event, but you can see like the little low hump, the first one, that's Sunday. We do have people on site, we have staff, we have vendors, we have sponsors getting ready, and we have people coming to register the evening before, so we do see some traffic. Then you get to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's only a half day on Friday, so it's less. Some very event-specific things about the bandwidth usage. At the top of each of the day peaks, there's actually a little dip. And I think it's fun to point out that's lunchtime. So you guys aren't doing anything on the internet during lunch. You guys are probably chatting and talking and eating, and we can see that. So I think that's pretty cool. Also, I think what's important to note is that we never go to zero. I know like Las Vegas is the city that never sleeps, but neither does our internet traffic, because I guess you're streaming or catching up on work or doing something, but things are happening all the time that we're monitoring. So I think those are kind of some fun things to call out. But this is like we mentioned, how we scale, but it's also how we forecast. So we take a look at these, we see how they trend year over year, and what kind of like bandwidth needs we're gonna need for our next event to support. Here's the chart. So take a look. I'm not going to hit on every number, so I'll give you some time to digest it. But there's some cool things to note. So if we think about those maps that I showed you with the different venues from 2016 to 2019, that also like really corresponds with our network devices. So I mentioned those are like the number of APs in the room, all of that type of work out to the edge network. You can see how that's grown as we've added buildings, because it's not only adding people to a building, but now we're adding multiple buildings, and that all needs its own event infrastructure. So that goes back to that operational load and lift and how we have to scale on a very physical level besides what you see in actually connecting. We can also look at sort of the total Wi-Fi clients. It's much larger than just the attendee count because, like I mentioned before, there's many, many types of devices connecting to the network. So you can kind of see how that's flowing as well. And then the external bandwidth. So this is pretty clear when we made the change to the current circuits that we're using now. And so that's what we'll have on site for this year as well. We don't project, if you can see, that we'll need more than that yet. But we're definitely currently redesigning, looking at the future ways to continue to expand the network, because we know the bandwidth will continue to go up higher. Story time. So I talked about fun, quirky events. We're also going to just tell you some fun stories for the rest of the time. We get to work in the event space, so we get to do some pretty awesome stuff. You guys are here, hopefully having fun. We're having fun, also troubleshooting random things that happen. So we're going to kind of share some of them. There's some loud clapping for something really cool over there, but I think it's for the fact that we're going to tell a story about beer.
So I mentioned before that we monitor and we alert on network infrastructure. We monitor when power goes down. We monitor if an uplink is unplugged. We get alerts when people spill beer into a switch and short it out. So it's not what we expected to see when we got the alert for this particular switch out of a hands-on lab a few years ago. But we do run labs. We do sometimes run them during happy hour. In this case, after this happened, we took a hard look at where we were deploying infrastructure and maybe how not to line up the edge of the switch with the crack in the table where an attendee was going to spill something. Luckily, we keep lots of standby gear on site, so we remedy these kind of things pretty quickly. But yeah, not your typical, hey, we lost power, and oh, just plug it back in, the switch will be back online. In a similar vein, when we go and look at venues and we look at infrastructure, we talked about redundancy, we talk about power a lot. All of our venues, when we look at the core campuses, when we look at where the MDFs are in the building, the main closets for the network gear, the IDFs, sort of the intermediate ones spread throughout the campus, we work very hard to make sure that there's redundant power there. Obviously, we don't want a power outage or something taking down a big chunk of the building. Well, this is exactly what happened last year at one of our venues at reInvent. How does redundant power go down, you might ask? There's battery backup inside. There's multiple power circuits going into one of these closets. There's also things like construction. And sometimes venues are doing construction in a neighboring part or outside the building, and lo and behold, they can find the wrong power circuit and can take down a piece of your event. So this is the kind of thing that now when we go into venues, we're asking these questions, we're looking to do reviews, we're walking, we go on site visits multiple times a year, and we walk pretty much every square foot of these buildings, and we're evaluating not only the network design and how we do wireless inside and how we connect the facilities, but also what's the redundancy and what is the infrastructure in that building, where do we need to bring battery backup, where do we need to bring redundancy, how do we make sure that at no time in the event that your connectivity is going away.
So on one of those site visits, this was a couple of years ago. If you've been to reInvent, or you went a couple of years ago, you might remember that the party replay was actually over on a slightly interesting location. It was in the parking lot over of the Link. So the thing about the Link parking lot is it's the other side of a main road from the Sands, and parking lots aren't the easiest place to get connectivity to. You kind of don't have existing fiber infrastructure typically in a parking lot. So we were out there on a site visit, and as you can see here, we're actually up on the roof of the Sands, looking over at this site, thinking, how on earth are we going to connect to this? Well, actually, part of the events team here, we're also working on this challenge because as much as we need to get connectivity out there, they need to make sure that we get all of you guys out there as well. So we need our attendees to be able to get to this parking lot, ideally without walking down the Las Vegas Strip. So actually, the event team decided that we're actually going to build a bridge across this main road just for replay. So that's what happened. But building that bridge takes time. And as we said, we have this kind of load-in happening, a bunch of things going on before the rest of the team arrive. And we need to provide connectivity out there at that point. So without the bridge, how do we do that? So what we were doing up on the roof here was actually looking at line of sight for doing wireless point-to-point links. So we had a wireless link down into the party area. And then once the bridge was available, we used that to carry physical fiber over there as well. Now, we always want to maintain multiple paths out to these various locations. As I talked about, 2 connections out to each of the venues. The same is true of the Link parking lot. So we maintained that wireless point-to-point link. And it's a good job we did, because during the build for the party, we had a forklift truck go over one of the fibers, then come back, lift it up, and break that fiber quite nicely for us. So luckily, still having the other connection didn't interrupt the build of the event. We engaged the teams. They then fixed that fiber for us, and we have our redundancy back in place. The other kind of interesting event that happened a couple of years ago is we did a Guinness World Record attempt for the most people eating chicken wings in the same place. Now, the thing about that is we obviously have all the event space. We needed somewhere that was capable of serving food, so that's going to be a restaurant location, but also capable of holding this number of people. So in discussion with kind of the Guinness World Record people, they said that's fine. You could do it in 2 locations. So we had 2 different restaurants for this, but they were actually in 2 different venues on the campus. And to meet the requirements of the record attempt, we needed to then have a bidirectional video link between the 2 venues, so they could effectively be one venue viewed together. So on the event network, again, we needed to deliver that streaming experience, but live between both locations, so that people could interact across them and successfully kind of beat that record attempt. So kind of another interesting element of something that we had to deliver during reInvent that year.
My favorite stories all have to do with things that happen outside. So this is actually a picture of that type of point-to-point connection that Steve was mentioning. This did not go across a bridge, but rather a parking lot. So another Las Vegas story. This was connecting between the Bellagio and the Cosmopolitan. In between those buildings, there's a large parking lot that shuttle buses, big, heavy shuttle buses, drive through. So not a forklift that could damage the fiber, but still a lot of things. Like when we run fiber across, we put these big cable trays over them, which are like big big plastic, like half-sphere looking things that kind of protect the fiber, but they also move. So like when a shuttle bus, it slides, and then it's back, and then it's forth, and it's like a very big risk to that sort of cabling underneath. So we did a point-to-point there. We've also done other sort of cabling situations with these trays, and we've all been out there like kicking the trays with our feet, making sure they're in place, like to run things into a parking garage or in other different types of things outside of our venues. Last year, we had some outdoor runs, and lo and behold to us, it rained in Las Vegas, which we didn't plan for. So I get like an email early in the morning, it's like 7 a.m., I'm on my way into the sands, and I'm like, what is this a picture of? I have absolutely no idea. It was a switch that shorted out because of the rain that we then decided to wrap in some trash bags until we could fix it. So there are things that we, even with the year's worth of planning, that we didn't plan for, and then we have to respond to. So the operational planning that we do allowed us to respond quickly. We were alerted when it went down, and we could fix it. But at that moment, I was panicked, like, what is going on? And so these are the kinds of things that we respond to all of the time. One more story to wrap us up, and it's a little security related to bring us back to the Reinforce theme here, but Brian mentioned that we do a lot of monitoring on our network, and one of those things that we're looking for are anything that sort of pops up that could be, unknown to us. And so this last year at reInvent, we got that alert, and everything worked smoothly, like the right people were alerted, we responded, we found it. It turned out to be nothing bad, but really a giveaway in our very own expo hall on a wireless sort of like monitoring device. And it popped up, we found it, but we think that's really funny because, that's our network. So we found it, and now we don't do those kinds of things anymore. So again, like that continual feedback on improving so that we're not alerting and alarming everyone in the security world. But it's there, so we do it. I'll just kind of recap for you before the end. This is our event network. We're here to serve you guys as our customers. We talked about the theory, how we do it at scale, how we kind of plan for growth. And we hope to see you at more events. So I want to thank you guys all for coming and encourage you to fill out your session and give us great feedback. Feel free to tweet about how great the event was and do it from our network. So please use the attendee network as well. Thank you guys.